Hello, sixth graders. Welcome to our final demonstration. This is the part where we hollow out our gargoyle and add a head to it. So I think I'm going to start by hollowing it out because right around now your projects should be about leather hard. They're no longer wet and movable. They're leather hard, meaning if I take the wing and try to wiggle it, it holds its own shape. So the best way to hollow it out is try to hold it in a place that is not breakable. Don't touch that tail, it's too skinny. Don't touch those wings, they're too thin. So you can use either a fettling knife or a loop tool. I like the thinner, smaller loop tools. And you're going to start from the bottom, kind of drill a hole going through the whole thing until you carve a hole on the other end of the body of your gargoyle. Now, the tail fell off. If things like that happen, it's no big deal. You can always slip and score that back on later. Don't stop drilling until it goes out the other side. So if one person's using a loop tool, the other person can use a needle tool or a loop tool, whatever works. That right there, the hole is as wide as my finger, but the walls are the thing that need to be as wide as my finger. So I can't tell you how big the hole has to be, but I can tell you how wide the walls of your gargoyle have to be. So now I'm scooping out the insides in a circular motion. Kind of like ice cream out of an ice cream pail. And if you end up accidentally carving too much out and there's a hole in the back of your gargoyle, no worries. You can always plug that up with extra clay. The idea is, especially with a loop tools are great for this. If you keep twisting, there should be a hole coming out of the top of your gargoyle. Lots of people get a little alarmed at this step. The inside of your sculpture is going to be kind of bumpy and rough. It's best if you don't leave it that way, because right now that is a soft clay that is still wet, but once it gets fired, it will become rock hard and sharp. So the less sharp things on your project, the better. At this point, I just want to start scooping them out, not in a circular motion anymore, but scooping it out so that it gets most of the majority of the inside out. You're going to end up with a big pile of clay at your seat. If it's still wet and usable, you know where to put that. If it's dry, you need to put that in the dry bin so I can recycle it. So the idea of this is no part of your gargoyle is thicker than your finger because the moisture in that clay heats up in the kiln and will escape too quickly, and that's when cracks and explosions happen. So you might need to check the width of your wall of your gargoyle by putting your thumb on the inside, your finger on the outside, and kind of measuring. You can kind of tell spatially how close your fingers are and how much needs to be carved away, how much more needs to be dug out. So we're going to leave the hole in the bottom of the gargoyle. It doesn't have to be the bottom. It could be the mouth if there's a hole in the mouth at all. It just needs one escape route for that trapped air. If I were to seal this off and seal this off, the trapped air on the inside has nowhere to go, and that is again how explosions happen. So I think that's pretty good right here. Just make sure there's no chunks of clay blocking the entrance. Maybe use a little bit of water to smooth out the inside of your gargoyle so that you don't have those sharp edges. Now he's ready for a head. So if you don't get around to making the head today, that's okay, as long as that's hollowed out. You don't want to hollow out your gargoyle when it's too dry. So hold up a ball of clay to your gargoyle, ask yourself, is that a good size for the head? If not, add more. You will be doing the same thing with the head, building it solid and then hollowing it out later. So in my preliminary drawing, I might have a lot of different plans going on, but I think I'm going to demonstrate how to make a dragon head. So, lots of different ways to do this. I think I need to add a snout. If you have a gargoyle that has a kind of snout, you're going to want to maybe make a ball of clay, but then flatten one side of that clay on the table like that, and then attach that. Everything needs to be slipped and scored, as you know, but I think I'm going to give you the sped up version where I'm doing shortcuts, where I'm attaching pieces of clay and not slipping and scoring. That way I can save you some time. Just know that any clay you add, whether you're adding eyeballs or a snout, you absolutely have to slip and score. So that's making roughly a snout shape like this guy right here. My next step, I think, would be eyes. I always like to hollow out the eye cavity. Some of my 6th graders think it looks a little scary at this point. Some 6th graders like how that looks and end up giving up on making eyes for their gargoyle. So I like to twist my loop tool till I have an eye cavity right here. Like that. Maybe take some water, smooth out that area so it's not so sharp. Sharp areas are not your friends. Not with clay. And then give him some eyes. You want to always slip and score, but I'm not doing that. Not right now anyway. Make sure that it fits in that area. No, he doesn't have pupils right now. So you got to determine what kind of pupils to give him. If they are rounded pupils, maybe you are, don't notice how I kept taking away clay because it wasn't quite fitting. So if he needs rounded pupils, maybe you have the end of a paintbrush to poke in there. Or maybe if he has skinny pupils, he has little dots. That'll make him look more scared, while as a bigger pupil will make him look maybe a little cuter. If he has slits for eyes, maybe you want to use something a little flatter like that to press into his face for pupils. They end up looking a little alarmed and bug-eyed at this point. So what I like to do, and you don't have to hollow out the eye cavities if you don't want to, but I find that that's a good way to go about this. What I like to do is make something that looks kind of like a comma. It's fatter on one side, skinnier on the other, and slip and score that. The eyebrows, even if you didn't draw eyebrows in your preliminary drawing, are really good to add for this project. So if he's really happy, his eyebrows are tilted upwards. If he's very angry, they're tilted downwards. Maybe he's giving you an oogly look, so one is up and one is down. That's up to you. So I think he needs to look angry, so I'm going to tilt them downwards. So not only does he have eyebrows, but I think he needs eyelids on the underneath part too. So maybe roll very skinny coils for the underneath eyelids right there, just so that they look like they sit inside of an eye or a eye cavity a little bit more naturally. You could also add forehead wrinkles. I have one right there. Maybe some snout wrinkles because his snout is a little furrowed when he is growling. His nostrils are very skinny slits, so maybe you want to add a little piece of coil like that for the nostrils. Any tiny pieces of clay are always very hard to slip and score, so that's why I use vinegar right here. In fact, I think I can get away with using vinegar for attaching all of this. So instead of slipping and scoring the eyebrows, I'm going to try to get away with doing vinegar. If you don't like gambling with this, maybe you want to slip and score your pieces because you don't want the little details in the eyes to go away. Vinegar tends to get rid of tiny little details. There's the nostrils. If the holes of the nostrils go away a little bit, you can kind of press a tool into that area a little bit more. So depending on what you want for the mouth, maybe he just has a closed mouth and you just want to draw that mouth onto him. If he has an opening roaring mouth, I like all of my gargoyles to have open roaring mouths because I can add tongues. You're going to want to cut a mouth into your gargoyle and kind of shimmy things open. Since I already used vinegar, he's a little squishy right now. So that's another reason why you don't want to rely 100% on vinegar, why you want to slip and score things. Whenever I cut mouths, the lower jaw ends up a little too long, so I like to trim that down just a little bit. Kind of like that. If I want to smooth out the inside of that, I think I need to use a paintbrush with a little bit of water, because that's a hard to get to area that my fingers just can't get to. If you want a tongue, there's a lot of different ways you can make a tongue. If he has a long, skinny reptilian tongue or a bird tongue, you're going to want to roll a coil that gets skinnier on the end and maybe stick that in there. Always use vinegar or something if it's coming upward to lick his upper lips or kind of sticking straight out. That would be something you add at the very, very end, because little tiny things like that break off. If he has like a flat human tongue, you're going to want to get a coil like this and flatten it, and maybe press a needle tool in through the center of that for that middle line, and then stick that in there. But you know what? I don't think he has a human tongue. So if he has fangs, you know how to do fangs if you did any kind of spikes on your gargoyle. Tiny little balls of clay that you sharpen the ends of by pinching. Oops. That's too small to slip and score. So maybe you're going to want to attach. You can attach them on the top like vampire fangs, or on the bottom. Either way, he'll look pretty menacing. I think if I'm going to do a dragon, he definitely needs some kind of fangs. I like to make that middle cleft of their mouth, and on the side of their faces, this is when modeling tools come in. I like to kind of get something with a round edge, kind of round off the snout, kind of like cats or dogs have that kind of thing. He might need horns, so you can pinch small horns into a ball of clay like that, or make something a little longer. So you're going to want to roll a coil. Make sure it's thicker on one end, thinner on the other. In order to make it skinnier on the outside part, I cut it at a bevel and then roll it so that it's a little bit more even. This could be good for tall horns that stick straight up like a steer. They can always curve back like this. Maybe they're ram horns that curve forward. If you have any textures you want to add, like a unicorn horn. Maybe you have that. Maybe you want to press something long, and I like to press a long fettling knife into the clay. If you can see that, maybe I can zoom in. So if I press my fettling knife into the clay like that, it will create textures that definitely don't look like a unicorn horn, but if I twist the clay in opposite directions, then the lines start swirling around the unicorn horn. Maybe that's something you want to add to your project. Depends on your preliminary drawing. This is a popular one, but it often has problems. If you want to have some kind of ram horn with textures, maybe use a needle tool and roll that needle tool across the surface of that coil. Now, like a candy bar, that indent is becoming a weak spot for your horns. So it is often Not uncommon for those to break. So I'm going to slip and score that and have it curl back and then forward. I don't usually add horns without ears. I don't know if that got on camera. So when I slip and score that, I curl it back and then forward, but it oftentimes breaks at that very weak spot there. Sometimes they survive, sometimes they break. If that happens, you can always hopefully slip and score it back together, but if you are able to slip and score it here and on another spot, then it is less likely to break off. So maybe you want to add just a little bit of vinegar to those two spots so that they don't go anywhere. If you want to add ears, lots of different kinds of ears you can make. But if you have like a cat ear, you're going to want to, I can zoom back out again. You're going to want to get a ball of clay, flatten it, cut the bottom, and then kind of curve it a little bit. That's going to be a good like cat ear, lion ear. Curve it a little bit. If you have a dog ear, you're going to be kind of making like a house cat ear. That's a triangle. Again, the triangle would be good for a cat, or if you bend it downward, it would be a good dog ear. I've also found that if you use, oh, might as well make a new one. If you use that triangle and then curl it, you end up with a good dragon ear or ram ear or gremlin ear. So I have my triangle and I curl it in so that it meets, and then you end up with a really nice rounded ear for like a dragon. Those are usually tucked right by where the horn is. Before attaching it to your gargoyle, you're going to want to make sure the ears, the nose, the eyes, all of that is attached. And then you're going to want to hollow the whole thing out. So get your loop tool. Right now my clay is still wet, not leather hard. So this is not the best time to do this. Best time is leather hard, because right now my hands are touching the clay and it is warping it and deforming it. So maybe let it wait a day in your shelves to kind of stiffen up, or you could always blow dry it a little bit with a blow dryer to get it to stiffen up. Get your fingers in there, feel around, make sure that the walls of your gargoyle head are even. They're not too thick, otherwise you know what happens, and you slip and score that right on there. So score marks on one side, score marks on the other side. My poor lopsided dragon without an ear and a horn. And don't forget the slip. Now here's an interesting bit. If you don't like how short that looks, he looks kind of like a cartoon character. Maybe he needs a neck extension. Maybe you want to add an extra coil around where the neck should be. It will make him look like he has a longer neck. If I can hold that up to versus without it. That's kind of up to you. I think I'm going to attach it just the way it is. I added slip, so he's good to go. Now, you also might want to ask yourself, do you want his head pointed in any directions? Is he looking straight? Is he looking to the side? That's a really dynamic pose. Is he looking straight up? Is he looking down? Actually, I kind of like the look of that. Problem is, there's a gap in the back where it doesn't attach. So I think I need to add extra clay to cover up that gap. You know, it ended up working out. The clay kind of moved around, but if he needed to look up and there's clearly a missing space where his neck needs to be, you might need to fill that in with a little extra clay. Now, a lot of my 6th graders forget to smooth out that clay, and it looks like he's wearing a big coil for a necklace, and that's not necessarily the look we need to go for here. If he's wearing a necklace, that needs to be a separate thing, but if he has a neck, please smooth out that clay. That extra coil I added needs to be smoothed out. And look at the back too. Smooth out the back. If there's a crevice that you can't get to, paint that with a little bit of water and it'll stick down really nicely. Kind of like that. Any little hard to get to areas, paint with a paintbrush just to smooth it out. Make sure you have enough examples of texture in your project. I lost a lot of detail in the face because it was moving around a little too much while it was still wet. I was touching things that shouldn't have been touched. It should have set up to be leather hard. But overall, that's kind of how it goes. If you look carefully at this gargoyle right here, you can tell I smoothed out where the head attached to the body by adding a coil and smoothing that out. Don't leave the coil looking the way it was before. That way it's just a smoother transition and it doesn't look like you made a snowman. So thanks again, 6th graders. Good luck.